All right, what's up, guys? Back here to talk a little bit of data. We're going to be doing some recording and being able to watch some screens here. But beforehand, I wanted to take a quick moment and talk to you guys about what this is really about. These are kind of the three things that your run data could be telling you. Whether you're a coach or whether you're an athlete, the big thing that I wanted to drive into today was the idea of being able to ask better questions. And what does that really require? It requires better data. So as we hop into the performance management chart, analyze a brief run workout, and then look into a couple of the other charts, I wanted to remind you guys that there's multiple stories that we're going to tell today. And just simply using one doesn't always give us the best look at the data, right? There's always a little bit more of a story to be told. And the big thing I want to look at is two things: subjective versus objective data. Today, all objective data. But the most important piece to understand here is that if you're a coach and you're looking at an athlete, you have to remember that if you read those comments first, it's probably going to give you a little bit of cognitive bias, meaning that you're going to look for bad if they tell you that this was a bad workout. Now, if you're an athlete, look at some of this information and see if you can give better data to your coach, or even look for interesting little pieces of information that might give you an idea of how to change your training or adjust things, so that you can elicit a better physiological performance every single time. So without further ado, let's dive in to some information here, looking at three things that your run data could be telling you. All right. The first place we're going to start here is looking at the performance management chart. I think this is one of the areas that a lot of people can get really, really stuck. They see a lot of dots, they see a lot of lines, and they don't really know where to go with this. What I want to talk about specifically today was the idea of predicting performances. Over the last about year and a half, I've had about 25 athletes. Unfortunately, due to COVID, haven't had more be able to get to the start line of a marathon. And in that time, what I have noticed is that when we have a peak CTL, for instance, this athlete is at 63. If I can achieve and put in roughly their what I expect them to finish, I'm able to call that kind of the point CTL, if you will. What I'm looking for here is that if I put in and I predict a performance, for instance, I'm predicting around 3 hours, 9 minutes for this athlete, and that produces a spot CTL of 61. Now, all that's really saying is that it's producing 61 points. Excuse me, it's producing enough TSS in that singular event to raise their CTL to 61 based on that amount of training stress. And so if they're going to hit 61, it tells me that based on that predicted performance, that they're fine. That's absolutely an achievable marker, because we've tapered, we're rested, we're able to hit that. Now, if I were to put in 309 and I got a CTL of say 67 here, and then we've got something else to kind of worry about, because that means we're overreaching based on our predicted performance. Now, when we start to build an athlete, we have to first assume that their zones are correct. And once we get to about 6 to 8 weeks out, we can build out the final pieces of that athlete's marathon training or whatever it might be, and put in our predicted performance, or at least our goal performance. And that is how we can kind of shift and draw out, hey, do we need to get more long runs in? Where do we need to adjust load? Just from the physical standpoint, that all this chart really is showing us training stress and being able to manage more training stress, right? Because we know CTL is 42 data points, kind of continuously modified. It's a moving and rolling average. So if we know that, then what we also know is that we're seeing the ability to handle more training stress. And so with that, we need to take a deeper look. This just gives us an idea of are we improving our ability to manage training stress? The answer here is yeah. We can see that he's been able to build this up, and that the stress applied to him on a specific day, if we consider CTL to be chronic training load and truly for what it is, then a 61 is an achievable performance. So let's dive into another area that you guys can look at that might be helpful when we talk about using charts and using TrainingPeaks to elicit good performances. All right, guys. So now we're back for the second one. The second thing we're going to look at here is looking at specifically at a workout. Now, for this athlete, this was a 12-minute tempo. This isn't super long, but the big thing I wanted to talk about here was decoupling. This has been typically year to year when I've sat down with coaches and sat down with athletes. This is one of the things that I use to predict performances. And what's really important is that pace to heart rate, right? If you think about it, we've got two parallel lines here. And what we're really doing is if we have two parallel lines, it's 0% correlation. If I have pace here and I've got heart rate here and this is lifting off, right, that's going to be a positive decouple. So when we talk about 0 to 5%, that's really a small amount of drift upwards. We get beyond 5%, that drift is bad. Now, when we talk about, that also means that pace can happen, that if we get to a certain heart rate, let's say they get to that threshold or that max heart rate that they're holding and they're just bouncing off the rev limiter here and we're watching pace fall off. We've all been there in a race. What that's really saying is, again, that's inefficient. So either heart rate is drifting away from a consistent pace and we're becoming inefficient, or heart rate's kind of maxed out and pace is starting to fall off. Where we'll see the inverse of that happen, and sometimes you'll see a negative pace to heart rate correlation. That's for instance, if we're seeing heart rate drop off and pace come up, and that's where we're going to start to see a negative relationship. And that would be, let's say we're going downhill and our pace is able to go up and we're recovering on the downhill, being able to breathe. But sometimes that's not always true to being a downhill thing. Sometimes those downhills are really hard. Heart rate goes up because we're having to do a lot of braking. So let's dive in and actually take a look at the data here. All right, so when we talk about the data here, the thing that I want you guys to really see is we're looking at about a 12 minutes of duration here. And what we can see is that there's a 7.6% pace to heart rate, and we're specifically looking for that right here. And what we're trying to do is determine, why is that happening? What's the issue here? And the issue is we see this huge acceleration, whether they made a quick stop at a stoplight and had to get back up to pace here. That was too hard of an acceleration. We can see that there's a big drop in heart rate. Maybe they were waiting, and that heart rate really, really picks up. So let's dive in and take a quick look. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag over this area until I see an intersection point right there where heart rate and pace intersect. Wow, we see a pace to heart rate of 8.1%. If you guys remember, we started in the 7s here. And we're about 4 minutes in. And if we take a look at the rest of this section, when this was about the end of the interval, I believe, we're going to see a minus 0.45%. Let's confirm we got our 12-minute tempo here. It actually goes a little bit further. I was incorrect. We're going to go to that intersection point. We're going to pull these laps off so we can take a look at just this, 1.47%. So he was efficient after this point. So what we can assume is a couple things here. One, heads downhill, pace goes up, and may not be super efficient at running this downhill portion. But then doesn't allow himself to recover, right? Accelerates a little too fast, hits this uphill portion, and heart rate is kind of getting slammed back up here again. And eventually, we're able to kind of control ourselves and only have to deal with this 1.47 pace to heart rate. Now, why is this important? Well, this is important because we want to focus a lot on pacing, especially when we talk about marathon, half marathon distances. It all goes back to efficient pacing. If we get out too hard early in a race, we're burning our matches for later in the race. So this is a great predictor of efficiency, and is really what the pace to heart rate metric is we call it decoupling, but because that can be a little confusing, I want you guys to think of this as an efficiency metric. Okay, so as we go through this, I want you guys to be able to click and drag and look at individual intervals. This could be as short as 400 meters. This could be for your entire marathon, and kind of split these things into chunks because it's a great way for you to be able to determine, oh, okay, I accelerated too hard here, my heart rate got too high, and I became inefficient. And this is just a comparison of that pace to heart rate, but it is so good at predicting the longevity of a performance as well. Is that if you're efficient early and you're able to push hard later in the race, this is what we want to see as a low correlation here in that 0 to 5% range. Let's take a look at the third and final metric or chart to be able to help predict performances. All right, welcome back, guys. This is the third one, and we're actually going to take a look at the fitness history, peak pace per mile here. What I want you guys to see is that as I click, we can click the hamburger icon here, and you can see that there's a different couple of peak types. Now, this is where I really want to talk about the difference between the performance management chart and the fitness history. As I said earlier, performance management chart really looks at our ability to increase our load, and that's based on training stress. But training stress alone can be accrued a couple different ways. We could do it through all hard workouts. They're very short, high TSS events, and we would get the same looking chart if we consistently built up intensity, and we'd see those dots kind of change around. But when we talk about accruing training stress in an aerobic fashion, like preparing for a marathon, like the athlete I showed you, that's about accruing stress through longer and longer runs. And that's another way to accrue TSS. So what we're looking at is our ability to manage training stress. Now, just because that line is growing does not mean that we're getting faster. Faster is different than training stress. They are not directly correlated always. If you're going long and slow, you're not getting faster. You're not going to, run a faster 5K because you focused on the 5K. You may run it just because your aerobic capacity is greater than it's ever been before. So if we want to determine if we're getting faster and if we're moving in the right direction, one of the great places to look is actually the fitness history. And when we talk peak pace here, what I want you guys to really look at is I like to use the 60-minute kind of as my improvement marker or my tool to see, hey, are we improving, our 60-minute best pace inside a given month, right? This athlete kind of moved up, and we see these things starting to kind of fall back into the 720, 725 range. Oh man, he must be getting slower. It's time to freak out. He's close to his marathon. Well, the reality is that we did a lot of interval work, and we had longer sections where long time, a long period of time, we would do 3 or 4 miles and then rest. So he would hit his marathon goal pace and rest. So in that 60 minutes, if I look back, I'm able to actually see that we're not consistently hitting 60 minutes of hard, except maybe once or twice. Normally that's kind of broken up and is especially important because of where this athlete lives. And so I know that I'm not worried about trying to see their marathon goal pace inside this 60 minutes. I want to see that I've trended upwards, and that knowing that information as a coach, I know what I'm looking for. But if we start to look back and use the 20 minutes or the 5 minutes, where do those become helpful? Well, the 20-minute marker I like is a 5K, 10K kind of, okay, are we getting faster? Are we able to kind of pick up our speed? Are our intervals moving in the right direction? And yep, we're seeing that in the 20 minutes. We know that he's got some good leg speed right now. He could probably go run a really solid half marathon. We know we're getting ready for the marathon. He's pretty confident at this point. So as we move back, this also allows us to start to think about, kind of getting a better summary here. When we peel back the onion of things, we're able to now kind of also let this kind of define better goals. So if we want to increase CTL, meaning we've increased our training stress load, we can also say, I want to do that while increasing my mileage or increasing my 60-minute speed or my 20-minute speed. And these become better overall predictors of faster performances. If we're just increasing CTL alone, like I said, you're just increasing your ability to manage training stress. So using this chart is a great way to determine, are we moving forward in the right direction? Are we able to see that, areas are increasing? Did we build up the mileage month to month as we got closer to this race? Yep, that means we're doing something right. We're probably going to be peaking soon if we're getting to this point. Are we seeing that overall the 20-minute, 60-minute, areas are improving? Are we seeing that those things are increasing? Absolutely we are. So when we talk about predictors of success and we're talking about being able to look at metrics, I want you guys to look at charts first and be able to say, okay, are these things progressing and increasing? Depending on what training block you're in, depending on what you're focused on as an athlete, these things will change, right? Like I said earlier, 60 minutes alone is not my predictor of success for an athlete in the marathon. There's much more that goes into that. It's a whole nother discussion. But realistically, across the board here, I want to see that there's a general increase in overall speed. And I want to see that when I'm working in a specific block, that there are certain areas that are going to be faster and faster. So this is what's going to allow us to help make better predictions for our fitness. And these will ultimately be what we use to help drive forward when we need to start to make decisions postseason. Okay, what did we do, in May and June and July? Can we improve that as we lead into our next marathon cycle? Or, hey, we made some mistakes here. Look at how much mileage we had, or look how much training stress we were putting in. That was too much at that time. You were too tired. Those are the type of things that help not only make an athlete better, it's what helps make that coach-athlete relationship even better. So overall, I hope this was a helpful discussion, kind of looking at 3 different areas to help predict your success. Not only maybe predict, but also just better analyze your performances. It can be a really difficult thing to, look when you get close to taper and say, man, have I actually gotten better? I don't know, right? We start to get those things crawling through our brain. The reality is that if you go look at the peak pace chart and you're seeing things improving in the right direction, if you're looking and seeing that your training load is increased, if you're able to go in your workouts and see that, hey, I'm doing a good job pacing, or reminding yourself of how those things felt, those can all lead to better predictions, especially in road racing. And I think really what I'll ask all of you to do is play around. Get used to kind of playing these things, looking for things, know what you're looking for. These things take time. And I think with all that said, don't let it overwhelm you. And without further more being said, I could ramble on and on and on. I'll let this end here. I hope you guys enjoyed kind of diving into some of these metrics, realizing I'm getting close to too much time spent talking about all this. If you guys have more questions, put them in the comments below. And if you guys have files or you'd like, I'll put a link inside the description where you can actually have me added to your TrainingPeaks. I can go in, take a look at your TrainingPeaks, and if you've got a file that you'd like analyzed, we'll do that as a further video. Without that, any more to be said, we'll see you guys later.